Zythak Morvanus stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a conquered territory. His reflection stared back, a towering figure with scales that shifted from deep emerald to midnight black depending on his mood, currently darkening with frustration. As one of the wealthiest beings in the Galactic Trade Consortium, he commanded fleets of ships, owned entire mining operations on 12 worlds, and could buy small planets with his lunch money, yet none of his vast fortune could fix what mattered most. "Sir?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his brooding. "The specialists from Kepler Medical have arrived for their consultation regarding young Master Kairos." Zythak's massive clawed hand clenched involuntarily. Another consultation. Another group of experts who would examine his son, run their tests, shake their heads, and deliver the same verdict with varying degrees of medical jargon. Kairos suffered from a rare genetic condition that affected draconian nervous systems, a cruel twist of fate that left his brilliant 12-year-old son's legs paralyzed from birth. The irony wasn't lost on him. Dragons were meant to soar through star-filled skies, to command respect through their sheer physical presence. Kairos possessed his father's keen intellect and fierce spirit, but his body had betrayed him before he'd even learned to walk. "Send them to the medical wing," Zythak rumbled, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. "I'll be there shortly." As he made his way through the corridors of his sprawling estate, Zythak's mind wandered to their upcoming trip to Earth. It was business. Of course, a new trade agreement with the human colonies that could potentially add another 1 billion credits to his already obscene wealth. But Kairos had begged to come along, fascinated by human culture in a way that both puzzled and concerned his father. Humans were peculiar. They were physically weak compared to most sapient species, lacked natural weapons or armor, and had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Yet somehow they'd carved out a respectable place in galactic society through sheer determination and an almost supernatural ability to adapt. They were also the only species that seemed genuinely unbothered by Kairos's condition, treating him as simply another child rather than a tragic figure to be pitied. The medical consultation went exactly as expected. 3 renowned specialists, 2 Draconians and a Centaurian, examined Kairos with state-of-the-art equipment worth more than most people's homes. They spoke in hushed tones about neural pathways and genetic therapies, but their conclusion remained unchanged. Current medical science could not repair the damage. Kairos, for his part, endured it all with the patient dignity that broke his father's heart. When the specialist finally left, the young dragon looked up from his hover chair with eyes that sparkled with an intelligence that reminded Zythak painfully of his late wife. "Father, are we still going to Earth tomorrow?" Kairos asked, his voice carrying hope despite the day's disappointments. Zythak studied his son's face, seeing past the physical limitations to the brilliant mind beneath. "If you still wish to go, then yes. Though I warn you, it's primarily a business trip. There may not be much entertainment for someone your age." Kairos's face lit up with excitement. "I've been reading about human culture, Father. Did you know they have something called dancing, where they move their bodies to musical rhythms as a form of expression and social bonding? It's fascinating how they've turned physical movement into art." The innocent enthusiasm in his son's voice made Zythak's chest tighten. Dancing. Of course Kairos would be interested in something his body couldn't do. "Yes, I'm aware of human dancing," he said carefully, "though it's not particularly relevant to our business dealings." "I know," Kairos said, still smiling. "But I thought it might be interesting to observe. Humans seem to find joy in the most unexpected places." That night, as Zythak prepared for their departure, he couldn't shake the image of his son's eager face. Kairos approached life with a curiosity and optimism that Zythak both admired and feared would be crushed by reality. The galaxy could be cruel to those who were different, and despite all his wealth and power, Zythak couldn't shield his son from every disappointment. Their ship, the Stellar Sovereign, was a masterpiece of draconian engineering, a sleek vessel that moved through space like a predator through water. As they departed their homeworld of Draconis Prime, Kairos pressed against the observation deck windows, watching the stars blur into lines of light as they entered hyperspace. "Father," Kairos said thoughtfully, "do you think humans see us the way we see them, as strange and different? The question caught Zythak off guard. He'd never considered the perspective might be mutual. What do you mean? Well, we think they're small and weak, but maybe they think we're too big and scary. We breathe fire and have scales. They have soft skin and create art with their bodies. Maybe different isn't better or worse, just different. Zythak found himself genuinely considering his son's words. In his world of business negotiations and power dynamics, he'd always viewed differences as advantages or disadvantages to be exploited. But Kairos saw them simply as variations in the great tapestry of existence. Perhaps you're right, Zythak said slowly, though in my experience, most beings fear what they don't understand. But fear isn't the only response to the unknown, Kairos countered. Sometimes it can lead to curiosity or even friendship. The humans I've spoken to through the galactic network seem more interested than afraid. As their ship hurtled through the void toward Earth, Zythak reflected on his son's words. Kairos possessed a wisdom that his wealth and power couldn't buy, the ability to see past surface differences to the essence beneath. It was a gift that Zythak was only beginning to appreciate, and one that might prove more valuable than all the credits in his accounts. Earth awaited them, a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable star, inhabited by creatures that had somehow earned the respect of species far more physically powerful than themselves. Whatever awaited them there, Zythak had a feeling their visit would be anything but routine. The Stellar Sovereign's navigation system chimed softly, indicating their approach to the Sol system. Soon they would discover what made humanity so special, and perhaps learn something unexpected about themselves in the process. The bustling spaceport of New Geneva thrummed with activity, as the Stellar Sovereign touched down with mechanical precision. Zythak watched through the ship's cameras as ground crews scurried around their vessel like industrious insects, their movements efficient despite their obvious excitement at seeing a draconian flagship up close. Most of them had probably never seen a dragon in person, let alone one of his stature and wealth. "Look, father," Kairos called from his position near the main viewport. "They have gardens between the landing platforms. Actual growing plants, not synthetic ones." Zythak joined his son, noting the carefully maintained green spaces that seemed to serve no practical purpose beyond aesthetics. It was very human, he supposed, this tendency to beautify even purely functional spaces. Most species built spaceports for efficiency. Humans built them with an eye toward making arrivals feel welcomed. It's inefficient use of space, Zythak observed, though without his usual dismissive tone. "Maybe," Kairos said thoughtfully. "But it's beautiful. And look how the workers seem more alive here. They're not just moving through their tasks like machines." Indeed, Zythak noticed that the human ground crew moved with a spring in their step that was absent from the mechanical precision he was used to seeing on other worlds. They gestured animatedly to each other, occasionally pausing to point at something interesting about his ship or share what appeared to be jokes. The diplomatic reception committee that greeted them was smaller than Zythak had expected, just 3 humans and a protocol droid. On most worlds, his arrival would have warranted at least a dozen officials and extensive ceremony, but the humans approached with genuine warmth rather than intimidated formality. "Mr. Morvanus," said the lead diplomat, a woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "Welcome to Earth. I'm Ambassador Chen, and these are my colleagues, Dr. Martinez and Trade Liaison Johnson. We're honored to host you and your son." What struck Zythak immediately was how naturally she included Kairos in the greeting. On many worlds, children, especially disabled ones, were barely acknowledged in formal settings. But Ambassador Chen stepped forward to address Kairos directly. "Young man, I understand you're interested in human culture. My daughter is about your age, and she's been excited to learn about draconian traditions ever since she heard you were coming." Kairos beamed with delight. "Really? I've been studying human customs. Is it true that you have celebration rituals called parties, where people gather just to enjoy each other's company?" Dr. Martinez laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "It's very true. In fact, there's a community celebration happening in the Arts District tonight. Music, dancing, food from a dozen different Earth cultures all mixed together. It's quite the spectacle. Could we—" Kairos began hopefully, then looked at his father with uncertainty. Zythak felt the familiar tightness in his chest. His son's eagerness to experience things that his condition made difficult or impossible was both heartbreaking and admirable. "We'll see," he said carefully. "Our schedule is quite full, Ambassador Chen seemed to sense the undercurrent of the conversation. Of course, business comes first. But Earth has a saying, all work and no play makes for a dull life. We've found that understanding a culture requires experiencing it, not just reading about it in contracts. As they traveled from the spaceport to their hotel in the city center, Zethak found himself studying the human cityscape with new eyes. Unlike the towering metal spires of draconian cities or the geometric precision of Centaurian architecture, human buildings seemed to grow organically from the landscape. Glass and steel mixed with brick and wood, creating a harmony that was both ancient and futuristic. "Father, look at the people," Kairos whispered, pressing his face to the transport window. Zethak followed his son's gaze to the sidewalks below, where humans of every size, color, and apparent ability moved together in the flow of daily life. He saw humans using mobility devices similar to Kairos's hover chair, but they weren't segregated or hidden away. They moved through the crowds as naturally as anyone else, stopping to chat with friends, entering shops, living their lives without apparent limitation. "They don't stare," Kairos observed with wonder. "When people see me on other worlds, they either stare or pretend not to see me at all. But look, that woman in the wheeled chair is talking to those men like it's the most normal thing in the galaxy." Zethak had noticed it too. Where most species treated physical differences as either spectacles or sources of embarrassment, humans seemed remarkably matter-of-fact about diversity in all its forms. Their hotel suite occupied the top 3 floors of a building that offered panoramic views of the city. The accommodations were luxurious without being ostentatious, and notably, every surface and pathway was accessible to Kairos's hover chair without modification or awkward accommodation. They designed this with accessibility in mind from the beginning, Kairos observed, navigating easily through rooms that on other worlds would have required significant adjustment. It's not an afterthought. While Zethak unpacked and reviewed his business materials, Kairos spent the afternoon on the suite's balcony, watching the city below with fascination. The young dragon had brought along a collection of books about human culture, and he alternated between reading and observing the reality below. "Father," Kairos called as evening approached, "that celebration Dr. Martinez mentioned, it's starting in the square below. Could we just watch from the balcony? I promise I won't ask to go down." Zethak joined his son on the balcony, intending to indulge him for a few minutes before returning to his work. But what he saw below made him pause. The city square had been transformed into a festival ground, with food vendors, musicians, and dancers creating a tapestry of human joy. People of all ages moved through the space, some dancing, others simply talking and laughing. What captivated him most was the absence of the rigid social hierarchies he was accustomed to. Wealth and status seemed irrelevant here. A street musician commanded as much attention and respect as someone wearing expensive clothing. Children played alongside adults, and the disabled were integrated seamlessly into the celebration. "Look there." Kairos pointed to a section where the music had shifted to something slower and more melodic. "Those people moving together, that's dancing, isn't it? It's even more beautiful than I imagined." Zethak watched as couples and groups moved in harmony with the music, their bodies expressing emotions that transcended language. For beings without natural weapons or armor, humans had developed remarkable grace and expressiveness through movement. "The wheelchair woman is dancing too," Kairos breathed with amazement. "She's spinning and moving with the music just like everyone else." Her chair is part of the dance. Indeed, a woman using a mobility device had joined the dancers, her movements flowing and graceful as she spun and glided with her partner. The other dancers made space for her naturally, incorporating her different style of movement into the overall harmony of the group. "Father," Kairos said quietly, "could humans teach other species to see differences as additions rather than subtractions?" The question hung in the air as Zethak watched his son's face, illuminated by the lights from the celebration below. For the first time in years, Kairos looked hopeful rather than resigned, as if he was seeing a future where his limitations might not define his possibilities. The distant sound of human laughter and music drifted up to their balcony, carrying with it something Zethak couldn't quite name. It felt like possibility, like the promise that tomorrow might be different than today. And for the first time since Kairos's diagnosis, Zethak found himself believing that might actually be true. The next morning brought gray clouds and intermittent rain, but Kairos's enthusiasm remained undimmed. He'd spent the night reading about human culinary traditions, fascinated by the concept of restaurants where people gathered not just for sustenance, but for social connection. "Father, could we try eating at a human establishment?" Kairos asked over breakfast in their suite. "I've read that they have places where strangers share meals and conversation. It sounds wonderfully chaotic." Zythak looked up from his financial reports, noting the careful hope in his son's voice. Their business meetings weren't scheduled until the afternoon, and the rain had forced the cancellation of their planned tour of the trade facilities. "Perhaps. I suppose we could find somewhere appropriate," he said slowly. Kiros's face lit up like a star going nova. "Really? Could we try somewhere that regular humans go, not just diplomatic establishments?" Against his better judgment, Zythak found himself nodding. "But somewhere clean and reputable. I won't have you falling ill from substandard food preparation." An hour later, they found themselves outside a modest restaurant called The Garden Table, in what the locals called the Arts District. The establishment occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone, with large windows that revealed cozy interior spaces filled with an eclectic mix of patrons. It was exactly the sort of place Zythak would normally avoid, too unpredictable, too common, but Kiros was practically vibrating with excitement. "Look, Father, people of all ages are eating together. Children and grandparents, artists and business people. It's like a living social experiment." The hostess who greeted them was a young human woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Maria. She showed no surprise at their unusual appearance, simply smiled and asked, "How many in your party?" "2, Zythak rumbled, still marveling at her composure. Most beings required some adjustment period when confronted with a 9-foot dragon and his son in a hover chair. "Perfect. I have a lovely table by the window with plenty of space for your son's chair. Right this way." As they settled at their table, Zythak observed the restaurant's dynamics with the analytical mind that had made him a successful businessman. The servers moved with practiced efficiency but also genuine warmth. They remembered customers' names, asked about children and jobs, treated regular patrons like extended family. Their server approached, a woman in her mid-20s with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and paint stains under her fingernails that suggested an artistic hobby. Her name tag read, Sarah. "Welcome to the garden table," Sarah said with a smile that reached her eyes. "First time here? I'm happy to explain anything on the menu." "Everything, please," Kiros said eagerly. "I want to understand human food culture." Sarah laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine delight. "Well, that's a pretty big topic. How about I start with today's specials and we'll see where your curiosity takes us." As Sarah described various dishes with obvious passion for the craft of cooking, Zythak found himself studying her with growing interest. She spoke to Kiros as an equal, neither condescending nor overly careful. When she mentioned ingredients, she explained their origins and preparation methods. When Kairos asked questions about human eating customs, she answered thoughtfully and thoroughly. "So humans eat together as a form of social bonding?" Kiros asked, fascinated. "Absolutely," Sarah replied, refilling their water glasses. "Some of our most important moments happen around shared meals. Celebrations, holidays, first dates, business deals. Food brings people together in ways that simple conversation sometimes can't." "What about dancing?" Kairos asked suddenly. "I've read that humans combine eating and dancing at celebrations." Sarah's eyes sparkled. "Oh, definitely. In fact, we're having a community dinner tonight with music and dancing afterward. It's a monthly tradition where local families get together to celebrate whatever's worth celebrating that month." Zythak felt his chest tighten as he saw the longing in his son's eyes. "That sounds wonderful," Kiros said quietly. "But I can't exactly dance." Sarah paused in her note-taking, looking genuinely puzzled. "Why not?" The simple question caught both dragons off guard. Most beings immediately understood the obvious limitations of Kairos's condition, but Sarah simply waited for an explanation, her expression curious rather than pitying. My legs don't work," Kairos said hesitantly. "Oh," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "So you dance with your chair. My cousin Danny's been doing that since he was little. He's actually one of our best dancers, really creative with his movements." Kairos stared at her in amazement. "Dance? With my chair?" "Sure. Dancing isn't just about legs, you know. It's about moving your body to express music and emotion. Some people use their whole body. Some use just their arms and torso. Some incorporate mobility devices. The important thing is feeling the music and letting it move through you however it can. Zythak watched his son's face transform as this new possibility settled into his mind. For 12 years, Kiros had accepted that certain activities were simply beyond his reach. But this human woman had casually dismantled that assumption with a few simple words. "Have you ever tried dancing?" Sarah asked Kiros gently. "No," Kiros admitted. "I never thought I could." "Well, if you're curious, there's no time like the present. We usually have soft music playing during lunch service, and there's plenty of space between the tables." Sarah gestured to the restaurant's open floor plan. "No pressure, of course, but if you wanted to experiment a little." Zythak was about to decline politely when he caught sight of his son's expression. Kiros was looking at the space between tables like it was a gateway to unexplored worlds, his young mind already working through possibilities. Could I try?" Kiros asked his father, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Zythak thought he knew about limitations and possibilities. Around them, the restaurant continued its gentle bustle of conversation and clinking cutlery. But at their table, a moment of pure potential balanced on the edge of decision. "The floor is level," Sarah added helpfully. "And most of our lunch crowd is pretty understanding. Danny usually practices here on slow afternoons. The staff loves watching him work out new routines." Zythak looked at his son, seeing not the disabled child he'd spent years trying to protect, but a young being hungry for experience and growth. For the first time, he wondered if his protective instincts had become barriers rather than shelter. "If you want to try," Zythak said slowly, "then we'll try." The smile that broke across Kiros's face was worth more than all the credits in Zythak's accounts. It was the smile of someone discovering that the world was larger and more welcoming than they'd ever dared to hope. Sarah beamed at them both. "Wonderful. Let me get your lunch orders in first, then we'll see what kind of dancer you are, Kiros." As she walked away to place their order, Kiros turned to his father with eyes shining with possibility. "Father, what if everything we thought was impossible is just unexplored?" Zythak found himself without an answer, but for once that felt like exactly the right place to be. The soft acoustic guitar music that had been playing in the background suddenly seemed more prominent as Kiros maneuvered his hover chair into the open space between tables. Several other diners looked up with mild curiosity, but their expressions held interest rather than judgment, a reaction that still amazed Zythak after a lifetime of dealing with other species' discomfort around difference. Sarah returned from the kitchen and noticed Kiros's position. "Perfect timing," she said warmly. "This song has a really nice rhythm for beginners. Want me to show you a few basics?" Kiros nodded eagerly, his earlier nervousness transforming into focused attention. Zythak found himself leaning forward in his chair, watching his son with an intensity usually reserved for crucial business negotiations. "Okay," Sarah said, moving to face Kiros. "Dancing is really just about feeling the rhythm and letting your body respond to it. Since you're in a chair, you've got a fantastic platform for spins and movements that people on foot can't do as smoothly." She demonstrated a simple arm movement that flowed with the guitar's melody. "Try moving your arms like this. Not rigid, just letting them float with the music." Kiros mimicked her movements hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as he felt the rhythm. His natural draconian grace, usually hidden by his focus on mobility limitations, began to emerge as his arms moved in elegant arcs that complemented the chair's smooth, hovering motion. "That's it," Sarah encouraged. "Now try adding some chair movement, just gentle turns and glides. Think of your chair as extension of your body, not something separate from it." As Kiros began to incorporate chair movements into his arm motions, something magical happened. The mechanical device that had always seemed like a barrier to normal life transformed into an instrument of artistic expression. His spins were smoother than any walking dancer could achieve. His gliding movements possessed an ethereal quality that seemed to defy gravity. "Oh, wow," whispered an elderly human woman at a nearby table. "That's beautiful." Her comment caught the attention of other diners, and gradually a small audience gathered. But unlike the staring crowds Kiros usually attracted, these people watched with appreciation and encouragement. When he attempted a particularly ambitious spinning movement that sent him gliding in a perfect circle, several people applauded spontaneously. Zythak felt something tight and painful in his chest begin to loosen. For 12 years, he'd watched his son navigate a world that seemed designed to highlight his limitations. But here, in this simple human restaurant, Kairos was discovering abilities he'd never known he possessed. "You're a natural," Sarah said, clapping her hands in delight. "Try this. Reach up high with one arm while you spin like you're trying to catch a star." Kairos laughed, a sound of pure joy that Zythak hadn't heard in years, and reached skyward as he spun. The movement was so graceful, so full of life and possibility, that the entire restaurant seemed to pause and appreciate the moment. "Father, look," Kairos called out, his face radiant with discovery. "I'm dancing. I'm actually dancing." Zythak's throat constricted with emotions he couldn't name. Pride certainly, but also grief for all the opportunities his protective fears had cost his son. And underneath it all, a growing understanding that he'd been thinking about Kairos's condition entirely wrong. An older human man approached their area, moving slowly but purposefully. Zythak tensed, ready to defend his son from whatever criticism or pity was coming. But the man simply smiled and said, "Young man, that was extraordinary. I haven't seen chair dancing that beautiful since my grandson performed at the regional competition last year." "Competition?" Kairos asked, breathless but eager. "Oh yes," the man continued. "Adaptive dance is huge here on Earth. People compete in all sorts of categories. Wheelchair ballet, hoverchair freestyle, even mixed teams with walking and seated dancers together. My grandson won 3rd place in the junior division." Kairos turned to his father with eyes wide with possibility. "There are competitions? Other people who dance like this?" Before Zythak could respond, Sarah jumped in. "Tons of them. Earth has the largest adaptive dance community in the known galaxy. People come from dozens of worlds to train here." She paused, studying Kairos thoughtfully. "Actually, there's a local group that meets every weekend at the community center. Mixed ages, all skill levels. They'd love to meet you. Could we?" Kairos asked his father, hope making his voice smaller. "Could we visit them?" Zythak found himself nodding before his rational mind could engage. "If you want to, then yes." The rest of their lunch passed in a blur of excited conversation. Other diners stopped by their table to compliment Kairos's dancing and share stories of adaptive athletes and artists they knew. Sarah brought over a tablet and showed them videos of dance competitions, each one revealing new possibilities that Kairos absorbed with hungry fascination. "This woman here," Sarah pointed to a competition video, "she's been paralyzed from birth. But watch how she uses her chair's momentum to create these incredible flowing movements. And this team, they've got walkers and wheelers dancing together, each bringing their own strengths to the performance." Kairos watched with rapt attention as dancers on the screen moved with skills and artistry that rivaled anything Zythak had seen in the galaxy's most prestigious entertainment venues. But more than the technical skill, what struck him was the pure joy radiating from every performer. "They look so free," Kairos observed quietly. "That's what good dancing does," Sarah agreed. "It frees you from everything except the music and the moment." As they prepared to leave for Zythak's afternoon business meetings, Sarah handed Kairos a card with the community center's information. "The dance group meets tomorrow evening," she said. "Just show up. They're always excited to welcome new members." Walking, or rather hovering, back to their hotel, Kairos was unusually quiet. Zythak worried that the excitement of the morning had overwhelmed him, or that reality was setting in about the limitations of what he could actually achieve. "Are you all right?" Zythak asked as they waited for the elevator. Kairos looked up at his father with an expression of wonder mixed with something approaching sadness. "Father, how many other things are there that we've never tried because we assumed I couldn't do them?" The question hit Zythak like a physical blow. In his determination to protect his son from disappointment and failure, had he actually been protecting him from life itself? "I don't know," Zythak admitted quietly. "But perhaps it's time we started finding out." Kairos smiled, not the bright excitement of the morning but something deeper and more profound. "I'd like that," he said simply. "I'd like that very much." As the elevator carried them upward, Zythak reflected on how a simple lunch had fundamentally changed his understanding of his son's future. The humans had done more than teach Kairos to dance. They'd shown them both that limitations were often just assumptions waiting to be challenged. Tomorrow evening couldn't come fast enough. The community center buzzed with activity when Zythak and Kairos arrived the following evening. Through the large windows, they could see people of various ages and abilities, warming up in a gymnasium that had been converted into a dance studio. The sight made Zythak's stomach clench with familiar protective anxiety, even as Kiros pressed eagerly against the glass. "Look, Father, there are so many different kinds of dancers," Kiros whispered in amazement. "Young ones, old ones, some in chairs like mine, some with artificial limbs, some who look like they've never had any physical challenges at all." Indeed, the group defied easy categorization. Zythak observed teenagers spinning in sleek racing-style wheelchairs alongside elderly humans, moving with the aid of various supportive devices. A woman with what appeared to be advanced prosthetic legs practiced leaps that seemed to defy gravity, while a man with one arm created beautiful flowing movements that incorporated his asymmetry into graceful expression. "Are you ready for this?" Zythak asked his son, though he was really asking himself. Kiros took a deep breath and nodded firmly. "I think I've been ready my whole life without knowing it." They entered through the main doors and were immediately approached by an energetic woman in her 40s, wearing a shirt that read, "Dance like nobody's watching, but everybody's learning." "You must be Kairos," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm Jennifer, one of the group coordinators. Sarah from the garden table called and told us we might have a new member joining us tonight." "Thank you for letting us visit," Kiros replied, shaking her hand with growing confidence. "I've never been part of a dance group before." "Well, you're in for a treat. We've got everyone from complete beginners to semi-professional performers, and everyone helps everyone else improve. That's our motto. Different bodies, shared rhythm." Jennifer led them into the gymnasium where the warm-up session was winding down. As they entered, the diverse group of dancers turned to welcome them with genuine smiles and waves. Zythak was struck by how naturally they incorporated his and Kairos's obviously non-human appearance into their greetings. A few curious glances, but no fear or excessive fascination. "Everyone, we have some special visitors tonight," Jennifer announced. "This is Kairos and his father Zythak, visiting us from Draconis Prime. Kairos just discovered the joy of dance yesterday and wanted to learn more about our community." A chorus of welcoming voices filled the room, along with several enthusiastic "Welcome to Earth" calls that made Kairos beam with delight. A teenager in a bright purple wheelchair rolled over, grinning widely. "Hey, I'm Marcus. Sarah showed me the video she took of your first dance yesterday. That spin move was incredible. Want me to show you some techniques for building up momentum?" "There's a video?" Kairos asked, eyes widening. "Oh yeah, it's been making the rounds on the local dance networks. You've got natural flow that people spend years trying to develop," Marcus explained. "But don't worry, we get people's permission before sharing anything publicly." Sarah just thought the community would love to see a new dancer discovering their passion. As the evening progressed, Zythak found himself relegated to a chair along the gymnasium wall, watching his son integrate seamlessly into the group. The dancers worked through various exercises, some focused on rhythm and timing, others on expression and emotional connection to music. Throughout it all, they adapted naturally to include Kairos's hover chair movements while learning from his unique perspective on spatial navigation. "Your son is remarkable," said a voice beside him. Zythak turned to find an elderly human man settling into the adjacent chair. "I'm Dr. Roberts, retired physician, but I volunteer here as a movement therapist." "He seems happy," Zythak observed, watching Kairos laugh as he attempted a synchronized routine with 3 other young dancers. "More than happy, he's discovering identity through movement. We see it often with new dancers who've never had the opportunity to express themselves physically. Dance isn't just exercise or entertainment for our community. It's a form of communication that transcends traditional limitations." Dr. Roberts gestured toward the group, where a complex routine was taking shape. "Look how they're naturally incorporating Kairos's different movement style into their formation. That's not accommodation, that's collaborative creation. His presence is making their dance richer, not more difficult." Zythak watched more carefully and saw what the doctor meant. Kairos's smooth hovering motion and ability to spin with mechanical precision was creating visual rhythms that the walking dancers couldn't achieve. Rather than working around his differences, they were building on them to create something entirely new. "On our world," Zythak said quietly, "difference is often seen as weakness to be hidden or overcome." "Ah," Dr. Roberts nodded knowingly. the medical model versus the social model of disability. We spent centuries thinking the same way, trying to fix people to fit a narrow definition of normal. Only recently have we begun to understand that diversity of ability creates strength, not weakness. I don't understand. Dr. Roberts pointed to a mixed group working on a challenging sequence. That team there, they've won several interplanetary competitions, not despite their different abilities, but because of them. The chair users bring stability and precision. The amputees create unique lines and movements. The neurologically diverse dancers contribute unexpected rhythm variations. Together, they create performances that homogeneous groups simply can't match. As if to illustrate his point, the group Kiros had joined began demonstrating their routine. What Zythak saw took his breath away. Rather than 5 individual dancers moving to the same music, he saw a unified organism that incorporated each person's strengths into a cohesive whole. Kiros's spinning chair movements created a central axis around which the others flowed, his precise hovering providing counterpoint to their more organic movements. How long have you been developing this approach? Zythak asked, genuinely curious. Generations, Dr. Roberts replied. Humans have always been physically diverse. We had to learn to build communities that valued different contributions. When we encountered other species and different forms of embodiment, it was natural to extend that philosophy. The music ended, and the dancers collapsed in laughter and exhaustion. Kiros hovered in the center of the group, his face glowing with exertion and pure joy. Several of his new friends were already planning future routines that would showcase his unique movement capabilities. Father, did you see? Kiros called across the gymnasium. We created something completely new. Marcus says my chair work opens up possibilities they've never explored before. Jennifer approached Zythak during the break. I hope you don't mind me asking, but how long will you be staying on Earth? Another week for business, Zythak replied, though his mind was already working through the implications of that timeline. Well, if Kiros is interested, we have an intensive workshop this weekend. Guest instructors from the Mars colonies and the Titan stations. It's designed for dancers who want to explore advanced adaptive techniques. She paused, studying his expression. There's also a performance opportunity at the end. Just an informal showcase for families and friends. But it gives new dancers a chance to experience performing. Zythak felt the familiar protective instinct rise. What if Kiros wasn't ready? What if he failed publicly? What if? But then he looked at his son, who was already deep in conversation with 3 other young dancers about creative possibilities for incorporating hover technology into traditional movement forms. Kiros wasn't asking for protection from potential failure. He was asking for the chance to grow. If Kiros wants to participate, Zythak heard himself saying, then we'll make it work. Jennifer's smile could have powered the gymnasium. Wonderful. I think this weekend is going to be very special indeed. As they prepared to leave, Kiros was exchanged contact information with his new friends, making plans for practice sessions and technique sharing. The shy, isolated child who had arrived at the community center had been replaced by a confident young dancer, eager to explore new possibilities. Walking back to their hotel, Kiros was unusually quiet until they reached the lobby. Father, he said thoughtfully, I think I understand something about humans now. What's that? They don't just accept differences, they celebrate them. They've figured out how to turn diversity into strength instead of something to overcome. Kiros paused, his young face serious. Do you think other species could learn to do the same? Zythak considered the question as they rose in the elevator. For the first time in his life, he was beginning to believe the answer might be yes. The weekend workshop transformed the community center into a hub of creative energy that seemed to pulse with life itself. Dancers from across the solar system had gathered, bringing techniques and perspectives from environments as diverse as the low-gravity mining stations of the asteroid belt to the high-pressure underwater cities of Europa. Kiros threw himself into the experience with an enthusiasm that both thrilled and terrified his father. Zythak spent most of Saturday observing from the sidelines, ostensibly reviewing business documents but actually watching his son discover abilities he'd never known he possessed. Under the guidance of master instructors, Kiros learned to use his hover chair's mechanical precision to create effects that mimicked the gravitational dance forms of the outer colonies. His natural draconian spatial awareness, enhanced by advanced proprioceptive senses, allowed him to navigate complex three-dimensional choreography with an elegance that left instructors shaking their heads in amazement. "Your son has a gift," commented Master Chen, the renowned instructor from the Mars Adaptive Arts Academy, during a break between sessions. "Not just natural talent, but the intelligence to understand how movement translates emotion. We don't see that combination very often." "He's always been bright," Zithak replied, though privately he wondered how many other gifts his son possessed that had never been discovered or nurtured. "Bright, yes, but this goes beyond intelligence. Watch how he connects with the music. He's not just moving to the rhythm, he's having a conversation with it. That's the mark of someone who could go very far in this art form." The comment sparked something uncomfortable in Zathak's chest. For years he'd focused on what Kiros couldn't do, what doors his condition had closed. Now he was confronting the possibility that entirely different doors, ones he'd never imagined, might be opening. By Sunday morning, the dancers had formed into groups for the final showcase performance. Kairos found himself selected for an advanced mixed ability ensemble that would perform an original piece choreographed collaboratively by the participants. The theme was emergence, the idea that beauty and strength could arise from seeming chaos when different elements learned to work in harmony. Zithak watched the rehearsals with growing nervousness. The routine was complex, requiring precise timing and trust between dancers whose movement vocabularies were radically different. Kairos had to integrate his mechanical precision with the organic flow of his partners, creating transition points that would allow the piece to evolve from individual expression to unified statement. "Stop overthinking it," called Marcus, who had become Kairos's closest collaborator. "You're trying to control the chair instead of becoming the chair. Let it be part of your body, not a tool you're using." Kairos nodded and took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. When the music began again, something had shifted. His movements flowed with a natural grace that made the hover chair seem like an extension of his nervous system, rather than a mechanical device. The difference was immediately obvious to everyone watching. "There," whispered Master Chen to Zithak. "That's what we've been waiting to see. He's not dancing with a chair, he's dancing as himself, complete and whole." The transformation in his son's movement was matched by a transformation in his entire bearing. The shy uncertainty that had characterized Kiros for most of his life had been replaced by quiet confidence. He moved through the world, not just the dance space, with a new awareness of his own capabilities and worth. That evening, as families and friends gathered for the showcase performance, Zithak found himself in the unfamiliar position of being nervous about his son's success, rather than worried about his limitations. The community center's gymnasium had been transformed with professional lighting and sound equipment, creating an intimate theater that hummed with anticipation. Sarah from the garden table appeared beside him as he waited for the performance to begin. "Nervous?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Terrified," Zithak admitted. "What if he fails? What if he falls? What if he soars?" Sarah interrupted gently. "What if he discovers that he's capable of things you never imagined? What if this is just the beginning of who he really is?" Before Zithak could respond, the lights dimmed and the first group took the stage. He watched a series of increasingly impressive performances, each showcasing different aspects of adaptive dance. But his attention remained focused on what was coming, his son's debut as a serious dancer. When Kairos's group finally emerged onto the performance space, Zithak felt his breath catch. The 5 dancers had been costumed in flowing fabrics that enhanced their movements, and under the stage lighting, they looked less like individuals with various physical differences and more like elements of a single, complex organism. The music began, a haunting piece that started with solo instrumentation and gradually built into full orchestration. As the first notes filled the space, each dancer began moving independently, their individual styles creating what appeared to be beautiful chaos. Kairos spun slowly in the center, his movements serving as a gravitational anchor around which the others orbited. Gradually, the dancers began to connect with each other, their individual movements finding synchronization points that created moments of unified beauty. Kairos's role evolved from anchor to conductor, his precise mechanical movements providing the timing framework that allowed his partners to take greater expressive risks. The crescendo of the piece was breathtaking. All 5 dancers moved as a single entity, their different movement vocabularies creating rich harmonic complexity rather than confusion. Kiros rose above the others on his hover chair, his arms extended like wings, while his earthbound partners flowed around him in patterns that suggested wind currents or water eddies. For a moment that seemed to last forever, they held the final pose, different bodies creating unified expression, limitation transformed into transcendence. The audience erupted in applause that seemed to shake the building's foundations. As the dancers took their bows, Kiros caught sight of his father in the audience. The expression on the young dragon's face was one of pure triumph. Not the triumph of overcoming disability, but the triumph of discovering ability that had always been there, waiting to be unlocked. After the performance, as families and friends congratulated the dancers, Sci-Fi found himself surrounded by humans eager to share their thoughts about Kairos' performance. But the conversation that affected him most came from an unexpected source. "Sir?" A small human child, perhaps 8 years old, tugged at his sleeve. "Is that your son, the dragon who dances in the chair?" "Yes," Sci-Fi replied, kneeling to bring himself closer to the child's eye level. "He's really cool," the child said seriously. "I used leg braces and I thought that meant I couldn't be a dancer. But watching him tonight, I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe I could learn to dance too." Sci-Fi felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 12 long years. "I think," he said carefully, "that you absolutely could learn to dance, and I think you'd be wonderful at it." The child beamed and ran back to her parents, already chattering excitedly about dance classes and movement possibilities. Zithak remained kneeling for a moment, understanding finally that his son's journey wasn't just about personal growth. It was about showing others that their own limitations might be nothing more than unexplored territories. When Kairos finally made his way through the crowd of well-wishers, his face was glowing with exhaustion and joy. "Father, did you see? Did you see what we created?" "I saw," Zithak said softly, "and it was magnificent." "You were magnificent. Not just me," Kairos corrected with characteristic humility. "All of us together. We made something that none of us could have made alone." He paused, his expression growing thoughtful. "Father, I think I want to keep dancing. Not just as a hobby, but really dancing. Would that be possible?" Zithak looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not a disabled child to be protected, but a young artist with unlimited potential waiting to be explored. "Anything is possible," he said, and for the first time in years, he truly meant it. The showcase ended with all the dancers joining together for a final community piece, their diverse movement styles creating a visual symphony that spoke to the power of inclusion and collaboration. As Zethek watched his son move with confidence and joy among his new friends, he realized that they had both been transformed by their time on Earth. Tomorrow they would discuss the future, education opportunities, performance possibilities, the logistics of pursuing dance as a serious artistic path. But tonight, it was enough to watch Kairos dance and to know that the galaxy was full of possibilities they were only beginning to discover. 6 months later, Zythek stood in the same penthouse office where the story had begun, but everything had changed. The view was the same: the sprawling city, the busy spaceport, the endless flow of commerce that had once defined his entire world. But now he saw it differently, through eyes that had learned to recognize possibility where he'd once seen only limitation. The intercom chimed with his assistant's voice. "Sir, the Earth Cultural Exchange Academy is calling about Kairos's application." "Put them through," Suthak replied, though the familiar nervous flutter in his chest had long since been replaced by proud anticipation. The conversation was brief and joyful. Kairos had been accepted into the Academy's prestigious adaptive arts program with a full scholarship, the first Draconian ever to receive such an honor. He would study under master choreographers from across the galaxy, learning techniques that would allow him to push the boundaries of what adaptive dance could become. More importantly, he would be happy. After ending the call, Zythak allowed himself a moment of reflection. The business empire he'd spent decades building still mattered to him, but it no longer defined his worth or his son's future. Success, he'd learned, could be measured in ways that had nothing to do with profit margins or market dominance. The door chimed, and Kairos entered with his usual enthusiasm. Fresh from his daily practice session at the newly opened Draconis Adaptive Arts Center, an institution Zythak had funded after returning from Earth, staffed by human instructors who had relocated specifically to bring their inclusive philosophy to other worlds. Father, the most amazing thing happened today. Kiros began, his eyes bright with excitement. Remember Scythia, the young centaurian with the sensory processing differences? She's been too shy to join group practices, but today, she asked if I would help her work on some basic movements. Zythak smiled, unsurprised. In the months since returning from Earth, Kairos had become an advocate for adaptive arts throughout the Draconian territories. His combination of natural teaching ability and lived experience with overcoming perceived limitations made him incredibly effective at helping others discover their own potential. How did it go? Zythak asked. Beautifully. Her movement style is completely different from anything I've seen. Very fluid and responsive to sound vibrations that most people can't even detect. We worked out some preliminary choreography that incorporates her enhanced sensory awareness as a strength rather than treating it as something to overcome. Kairos paused, hovering near the window with the same thoughtful expression that had become characteristic since Earth. Father, I've been thinking about something the instructors said today. They want to establish an interspecies adaptive arts exchange program, teams of mixed-species dancers who travel between worlds, sharing techniques and performing together. That sounds ambitious, Zythak observed, though he was already mentally calculating the logistics and funding requirements. It is ambitious, but I think it could be important too. Every species we've met has individuals who don't fit their society's standard physical or neurological templates. If we could show them what we learned from the humans, that diversity creates strength rather than weakness. Imagine how many beings might discover abilities they never knew they had. Zythak felt the familiar swell of pride in his son's vision and compassion. What would you need to make something like that work? Funding, obviously, but also political support. It would require cooperation between multiple governments and species councils. Kairos turned from the window, his expression serious but hopeful. I was wondering if maybe your business connections might be able to help open some doors. The request was exactly what Zythak had been hoping to hear. For months, he'd been looking for ways to use his wealth and influence to support the changes he'd witnessed in his son and himself. An interspecies cultural program would be the perfect synthesis of his business skills and their new understanding of what really mattered. I think that could be arranged, he said carefully, but it would mean significant changes to our lives, probably relocating our primary residence to Earth, at least temporarily. Extended travel throughout the galaxy. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? Kiros's answer came without hesitation. Father, 6 months ago I thought my life would be defined by limitations. Now I can't imagine not using my abilities to help others discover theirs. If this program could reach even a fraction of the beings who need to know they're not alone, yes, I'm ready for that commitment. That evening, they attended a performance at the Draconis Adaptive Arts Center. The program featured dancers from 7 different species, including several Draconians who had never had access to adaptive movement training before meeting Kairos and his human-trained instructors. The performance was technically impressive, but more importantly, it radiated the same joy and sense of community that had first captivated them at the Earth Community Center. After the performance, as they mingled with audience members and dancers, Zythak found himself in conversation with Ambassador Chen, who had traveled from Earth specifically to see how their cultural exchange was developing. You know, she said, watching Kiros work with a group of young Centaurian dancers. When we first met you 6 months ago, I could see how much you loved your son. But I think you were loving him in spite of his differences rather than because of his completeness. Zythak considered her words. You're right. I was so focused on protecting him from a world I thought would reject him that I nearly prevented him from discovering a world ready to embrace him. The beautiful thing, Ambassador Chen observed, is that he's not just finding acceptance, he's creating it. Every person he teaches, every barrier he helps remove, every assumption he challenges, he's making the galaxy a more inclusive place for everyone. As if to illustrate her point, a young Draconian approached them hesitantly. She was perhaps 10 years old, with the characteristic scales of their species but an obvious tremor in her movements that suggested neurological differences. Excuse me, she said shyly to Zythak. Are you Kairos's father? I am, Zythak replied, kneeling to her level. I wanted to thank you, she said, her words coming slowly but clearly. Before Cairo started the center, everyone said I couldn't do things because of how I move. But he taught me that my shaking makes interesting patterns in dance, and now I'm going to perform in the next showcase. The simple statement hit Zythak with unexpected force. This child, who might have spent her life believing she was limited, was instead discovering artistic expression because his son had learned to see difference as possibility. I think Kairos would say that. You taught yourself, Zythak replied gently. He just helped you see what was already there. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Kairos made his way over to his father. I've been offered a position, he said without preamble. Director of Interspecies Cultural Development for the Galactic Arts Council. It would mean overseeing adaptive arts programs across 47 worlds. Zythak felt his chest tighten with the old protective instinct, then consciously relaxed. His son was no longer a child to be protected. He was a young adult with gifts the galaxy desperately needed. It sounds like an enormous responsibility, Zythak said. It is. But I keep thinking about that little girl who just thanked you, and all the others like her across the galaxy who don't even know yet that they have gifts to offer. Kairos paused, his expression reflecting the same determination that had driven Zythak to build his business empire. I want to help them find out. Then you should take the position, Zythak said simply. And you should know that whatever you need, funding, connections, someone to handle the bureaucratic complications, you have my complete support. Kairos smiled, but it was different from his childhood smiles. This was the expression of someone who had found his purpose and was ready to pursue it with everything he had. Thank you, Father, not just for supporting this, but for letting me discover it in the first place, for taking me to Earth, for letting me try dancing, for believing I could become more than our limitations. As they traveled home through the gleaming city, Zythak reflected on how completely his understanding of success had transformed. 6 months ago, his greatest achievement had been accumulating wealth. Now it was watching his son discover abilities that no amount of money could have purchased. The hover car passed through the arts district, where late-night practice sessions were visible through studio windows. Mixed groups of beings from different species moved together in harmony, their diverse abilities creating collaborative beauty that none could achieve alone. Father, Cairo said thoughtfully, do you remember what you told me about humans when we first arrived on Earth? That they were physically weak, but had somehow earned respect through determination? I remember. I think you were wrong about the weakness part. They're not physically weak, they're just physically different. And they turned that difference into a kind of strength that doesn't depend on size or natural weapons. Kairos paused, watching the dancers through the studio windows. They taught the galaxy that adaptation isn't about changing yourself to fit the world. It's about changing the world to include everyone. Zythak nodded, understanding that his son had articulated something profound about humanity's true gift to galactic civilization. It wasn't their technology or their trade goods. It was their revolutionary idea that diversity itself was valuable. And now you're going to help spread that understanding to 47 worlds, Zythak observed. We're going to help spread it, Kairos corrected with a grin. I'm going to need an experienced business executive to handle the logistics of an operation that large. As they pulled into their building's parking area, Zythak realized that his life's greatest adventure was just beginning. He'd spent decades building an empire designed to accumulate wealth and power. Now he had the chance to build something far more valuable, a legacy of inclusion and possibility that would outlast any financial achievement. The human waitress who had encouraged his son to dance had changed more than just their evening at the garden table. She had changed the trajectory of their lives, and through them, potentially the lives of countless others across the galaxy. Some changes, Zythak reflected, were worth more than all the credits in the known universe, and some discoveries were too important to keep to yourself. Tomorrow they would begin planning their galactic mission. Tonight it was enough to know that his son was exactly who he was meant to be, and that the universe was ready for everything he had to offer.